This podcast contains potentially adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly sexual context. Listener discretion is advised. Okay, welcome to Drinking with Authors, the podcast. I'm your host, Erica Lance.
J.M. Paquette.
With me today is, you don't just say your name, like you have to say that you're the co-host.
You paused. I was filling in.
Yeah, I know, but you're supposed to say, anyway, moving on. Okay.
With her today.
And our guest today is the amazing and tantalizing Aidée Jaimes. Oh my gosh, I just did it. I said I wasn't going to do it, and I'm okay. I am going to blame what I'm drinking. Aidée Jaimes. I'm going to blame what I'm drinking because I maybe had brunch. So I have champagne with blackberry liqueur in it. I've been drinking for a couple hours. So hashtag life goals right there. Okay, JM, what are you drinking that's boring that nobody cares about?
I'm drinking a lime bubbly because I don't drink.
I understand. Okay, Aidée, what are you drinking for us today?
I am drinking my fave, which is reds. I like apple ciders.
Me too. I'm actually a huge fan of putting a shot of honey jack in that apple cider. So I've taken it to a whole new level of, it's kind of like when you put, what is it? Fireball in it. Although apparently Fireball has formaldehyde, so you're not supposed to drink it. Okay. Aidée, what I would like you to do is tell our guests what kind of books you write that maybe don't know you.
Well, I usually write edgier, I would say, darker stories, probably a little risque especially with romance readers. You know, I kind of don't necessarily stay within the lines of what you would consider proper romance, I guess.
I love that. And looking at your books, because we like to cyber stalk our guests, your book covers are just amazing. They're freaking amazing. I love them. And the titles, they're awesome. So let's go back in time. When did you decide you wanted to be a writer?
I actually started writing, I think it was maybe around 2012 or so, maybe 2011. I thought I was just crazy because I would have a lot of stories in my head, and it was just strange because nobody that I knew wrote stories. And I've always been an avid reader for as long as I can remember. So I just had these stories in my head, and I would write them like by hand and put them in. And I was already married, so I was kind of embarrassed to like even share it with my husband. So I would stick it between the mattresses. Just because I was like, I didn't want him to like accidentally find it because he finds everything. So,
well, we know he doesn't change the sheets in the household. That is something you're doing, obviously.
So that's one thing. One place he never went. So yeah, that's how I started. And then eventually, I finally just told him, I was like, hey, I have to tell you something. I wrote this book like on paper, and so he kind of really encouraged me to write it. He's like, you should write it, even though he has like no desire at all to read romance. But, and this was actually my first story I wrote as Haden Hudson, which was a pen name that I used because I didn't want anybody to know who I was. I definitely was like, I didn't want my family to know. It's hard when you have these stories in your head and you're going to share it with people, because then it's kind of like this window. They're like looking in your brain how you work, and it's really hard. So I had this pen name, and so I actually wrote several books, PNR books, under that name, and that was really what got me into it. And back then, I think self-publishing was really just barely getting started, like 2012. So I didn't really go much anywhere with it, and then I had a baby, and I just stopped writing. And then a couple of years later, I came back and my writing was just so different that I just decided to just start fresh, and that's what I did.
I think that's amazing. Did you write it all when you were much, much younger? Like, was that a thing when you were, a lot of us wrote a lot of stories or created things, whether we were in kindergarten, we created stories, built up imagination. Some of us did gaming, like stuff like that. I always think it's interesting when an author has sort of that moment later in life where they go, I want to be this author, which it sounds like you did, but I wasn't sure if you wrote before.
I would write just, in school, like I would write a lot of poems, and that was usually my strong suit was when we would have to write essays on stories or whatever. That was like my thing, but I never actually came up with my own story until I was actually already married. Like I was already 22, 23. Like I was much older when I actually started to have these ideas in my head. And it was just so strange, to me, because I was already, I guess I felt like I just didn't belong in anywhere because nobody that I knew did it. So that, yeah.
That makes sense. So basically getting married blossomed your erotic dark story thing. I'm not sure what that says about your husband, but no, just kidding. Oh my gosh.
Well,
So, go
dark
ahead.
the darkness didn't start until after I had a kid. I think I was just so sleep deprived. I just really I was just tired. I was just like, so I started writing darker. But it was before, it was just all like lovey-dovey PNR, it was very straightforward. It definitely was a lot sweeter. Steamy,
Oh,
but
so what was the first book under when you sort of did the reinvention? What was the first book
yeah,
you published?
that first book was The Ticket, which is actually a series. It's the Affair series. That was the very first one that I actually wrote that several years before I published it.
I love the cover on that one, by the way. That cover is awesome. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm not even going to share it because everybody needs to go look up that cover, but that cover is freaking awesome.
Yes, that was actually the first cover that I had professionally made. And it was, I told the guy, the designer, just basically a quick what the story was about and how she looked in my mind. And he just came up with that. And to me, it's one of my favorites too. It was just such a beautiful, like evocative cover. I feel like he did an amazing job.
Yeah, and for the genre, they're very eye-catching. I think that's one thing we talk about that a lot. Covers people choose because people get very excited about doing books and they think they come up with these brilliant cover ideas that are not in the genre. They don't make you think of the genre and they don't grab your eye. Like you want, because you get a thumbnail sometimes, it's like an inch tall. So you need it to be able to grab the person when you do that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, for sure. I thought he did a great job.
He did. Did you do, so are most of your covers, do you farm them out or have you learned how to do them yourself?
I've some of them have been done. So like Good Mr. King was done by a woman who she's also just so talented. She did that one. And she did the private investigation covers as well. And then I did all the others. I think I did all the others. Yeah.
So did you do the Dark Captive, like Cruel Seduction and Ruthless Embrace and stuff? Because those are amazing. I love those.
Thank you. Yeah, I did those, and I did the new ones too. The Mafia series that I'm writing now, which is King of Bourbon Street and Queen of Deceit. I did those, and I did I think I've done pretty much every other one. Once I learned, if I had something that was extremely like where I would need a lot of tweaking, then I would probably hire out. But to me, it's so much fun. That's like a big part of my storytelling is coming up with a cover. And a lot of times I come up with a cover first and I like stare at it and stare at it and stare at it as I'm writing, because it just kind of makes me like imagine the story even more,
Well, that has got to be the first time I've actually heard that on this podcast that I can think of. Can you think of, Jen, can you think of a time that we've heard that?
No, other than we were talking to someone about who bought covers and they saw a cover and were like, oh my God, I'm writing that story. But it's not generally something people do. That's cool.
That's a great idea.
I have a random survey question because I have strong feelings about this. When you read a book and the characters on the cover don't match what they look like in the book, does it bother you? as a reader.
Yes, and it does actually. Yes. And that's one of the reasons too why I always come up with the well, not always, but why I like to come up with the covers, because I want to somehow tie the cover to what the story is. And if I've already started writing the story and the cover doesn't come to me until after, I'll change the story to match that, or to somehow pull in like in one of the scenes. And that's something that I really like when I read too, because if I look at the cover and it says that she's a redhead or whatever, and then like she's not, like that, I'm like, oh, like it kind of throws me off, because I already saw this, I already have it in my mind how it's supposed to look, and then I have to like change it.
She's doing that for personal reasons, asking you that question. And so as her publisher, I'm not going to let it fly as a question. I might edit it out. No, I'm just kidding.
It's a conversation that I'm having with different people, and people have very different feelings on it. So I was like, am I crazy? Because it bothers me when the cover doesn't match. I get annoyed as a reader. So it's just something I was thinking about.
It's a very polarized topic.
Yes,
it is. Very polarized topic. We don't get into political conversations on this show, Jen. Just
the
kidding.
Politics of book covers.
So have you always been self-published? Did you ever attempt to go the traditional route?
No, I never did. Not once. And I think part of it was because I always from the get-go heard how hard it was, and like as far as like how much they made you change your story. And I don't want to change my story. I want, like, once I get it, like that's what I want for it to be. So I've always been very just always wanting for it to be how I want it to be. And I actually sometimes even struggle when I have beta readers when they want like something changed in it, because I want it to be a certain way. That's how it is. Like it's the movie. It played out in my mind and I wrote it.
I think it's interesting because I think that for writers that have that kind of view, I think it's fantastic, but I think it's very much why self-publishing is so brilliant for those type of writers, because you know, if you have that, and you're not the only author I've run into, but having any kind of publisher whatsoever, there is a degree of control that you have to give up and be willing to sort of listen. And even if it's not that they really want to change your story, but you go through editors and stuff like that. So that's my follow-up question is, you've written the story the way you want to write it. Where does the editing fit in? How does it fit in your stories?
Well, the editing, so my editor has been with me for a while, and we, obviously we did a test before we started, because I wanted to make sure that we have the same, I guess, way of thinking. And luckily she likes dark stuff. So she will change things, or she'll tell me this, she's just straight up tells me this does not make sense. But it's different to change that, to say, you need to change how it gets from A to B than to, for me to actually change the way the story feels in my mind. But
I think that makes sense. And that's how, in finding an editor, but also finding a publisher that works with you. I hate it when I hear stories from authors where a publisher has taken the book and gone, we want you to have a different ending. We want you to have this different or that different. Because I go, why the hell did you ask them for the damn story then? Like, this is their story that they want to give you. And now you're making them write a whole different story to meet with what you need. I think if there's gaps or holes, or it's confusing because we have that iceberg where that whole gigantic story is in our head and we're telling this much of it, and then we have to go, okay, maybe we need to add a little more because we haven't told it enough. But having somebody come and go, no, actually, as a matter of fact, this should not be a detective series. This should be about railway workers. And I can get where you as an author go, get the fuck away from me. Like, like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. And my editor will, she'll obviously, like, because I don't see a lot of the things that she sees. Like, she obviously sees, like, if there's a big hole in the story, that she's like, wait a minute. But it, it still stays within it, within the line, within the original story. I guess that's where she and I work so well together, is because even when she does add something to it, it's exactly what I would add to it. So it works.
No, I think that's good in finding that. So well done on finding that, editor, because
Yeah.
I think that's a struggle. But I'm very happy to hear that you do embrace editing, because I think there's that other balance with self-published authors sometimes where they don't realize that there are some sort of guardrails you need to have, like an editor, and just typeset your book properly so it flows correctly.
Oh yeah, and I mean, she catches like, the first time I ever sent her something, I was like, it's gonna come back like with maybe three little things or some misspellings, and then she sent it back to me red, like the whole thing was like marked. I was like, like I couldn't believe how much she found that I didn't, because I would read it and reread it and reread it, and I never saw any of those things, but my mind fills in the gaps, I guess.
Well, we do, because we're playing, you said it earlier, we play the movie. It's a movie. Like, we see all of the pieces, right?
Yeah.
And as we're typing, I think this is a habit almost every writer that I know has. We tend to forget some of the details when we're writing the movie that's playing in our head, like some little piece that needs to go there. And did you mean to do A or B? And some authors get way better at it. I think we get better at it as it's pointed out to us.
Yeah.
To go, hey, maybe you need to there's a few things about this, like how did they get a gun in their hand? You didn't mention how that gun arrived. You might, there's no gun, and then there's a gun, and you might want to mention. And some authors do little tricks, like who is it, Jen, that talks about putting a gun in every room?
It's Neil Gaiman for writing comics. He says he had to put guns in drawers so that at the end of the story, when he got to, issue 75, he had put a gun in a drawer in like issue 16. Because if you're doing comics, you can't go back and just be like, on page 22, let me put in a sentence here, because they were already published monthly. So he said he put so many guns in drawers.
Yeah.
And I think that's hysterical, because I think there are authors that do stuff like that put little sort of Easter eggs that maybe never tie to anything, but just in case later on in the series they need this thing to happen, like a coffee barista. I think in any kind of romance and erotica, it's really great to have a coffee barista that you can insert to do random things.
Yes.
At any point during the story, or a pizza delivery guy, like insert random person that can help plotline along when you get to that point.
Yeah, you need that. I think I do that to certain, everyone. You have to have that person that, if you have like the mob boss, he has his right hand that can do everything. He just orders it and it gets done.
No, it's perfect because it's believable, but at the same time, you run into difficulty. You don't have to go back to the beginning of the story and insert this other character to make the story work. And how do you do that? I think so. With that, what kind of writer are you? Do you plot your books out? Do you just get an idea in your head? You sit down and write? Where do you fall in this?
I think I plot it out, but I don't necessarily like write it down. Like this is going to happen. And this, like, I just sort of have like this, A to Z story in my mind without all the little nitty details, but pretty much the whole story. And then I just kind of start writing, and a lot of the details come as I'm writing it, but I don't write, from A to Z. I write like Z, B, I'm all over the place. And then right at the end, I bring it together, and then I'll write the things that make the pieces connect. So I'm like all over the place. My editor hates it because she'll be like, why don't you send me something early? I have some time right now. And I'm like, I can't. I'll have like the ending.
You're like, I can. You're not going to want to read it, but I can definitely send it to you. Here, access to Google Drive.
Yeah.
Into the mind of a writer, so it goes into crazy pants time.
Chaos.
So if you write like that, like how do you start with character ideas or dialogue? Like what's your first thing that you would write, like the first scene in a new book?
Usually almost 100% of the time. I think it's maybe been the last book that I wrote that was not like this, but I always write the ending because I always know where it's going. So I know I usually have that like the last scene, the apex scene, like where like it's that drama or whatever, that's the scene that I have in my mind, the emotional one. and I write it, and it, it ends, and then I'm like, okay, well, then how did it get to here? So I almost oftentimes will write backwards, but I do really jump around. Sometimes I will, write the end, and then I'll go to the very beginning and kind of work my way, but it's always the end. It's always that last scene.
Cool.
What about with your series? So do you keep, when you're writing series, I'm sure there's some components that stay throughout the entire series, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you track that? Do you keep a world book or anything like that on the different things?
Well, for the series, like the Affair series, it's actually one big story. So it's not, it's the same characters for the first 3 books. It's the duet, and then there's like a little from his point of view, because it's all from her point of view. And then within that story, she has a friend that tells her a little story, and that's where that's where the 4th book comes in. So they're all already sort of there. I don't have to add anything extra. And then the other series, they're duets. So it's just basically one ginormous story that's cut in half. I don't know if that answers the question, but
no, it totally does. And that makes sense. And that's a great way to do it. Jen has written a whole world, and it has a map, and it has all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm way too much of a pantser to have a map. Like, that is not something that I'm ever going to be writing, is somewhere that has a map that doesn't already exist, that I can just look up places on the map.
I also threw dice to make that map. So that's
of like, I don't know that I have a story that's where I would need to do a map, but I do have places like in the world in my head, that I bring out through many of the books, like a club that comes up in the Cruel duet is also going to come up in the other, even though they're not actually interlinked. It's the same locations, the same places that I made up come up again and again. The characters visit those same places. And they're already so vivid in my mind that I just basically describe it over again in the next book. Or I'll flip through and stuff, or if one, I have a book that is at some point going to come out. It's called Whiskey Dick, and he's a whiskey. He does whiskey, and his brand is actually used throughout a lot of my books. Like, I use his brand of whiskey. So it kind of I sort of try to tie them all together with things that I've already made up that way.
I think that's brilliant. We have a bunch of people that we write with and stuff like that. And one of this is just happening with another series too, but in one of the series, there's a bar from a friend of mine who wrote it in her erotica series. And then I took that bar and the characters from that bar, and I put it in my series. And it worked out really well. I had to ask her some questions about it, but it's in that series. And then another friend of ours took a character from my erotica book and a location in my thing and put it in her series. So it's this thing where if you read the series individually, you don't, like, if you read my erotica series, you don't see it. But I feel later on this will be a fun conversation and a little thing to throw out there, these little sort of Easter eggs that go between the locations. But I think it's a great way to look to do that, because it's already created. You don't have to create that same dance club 10 times in 10 different books. Just use the dance club, right?
Yes.
You've made it a location. I love the idea, because I just started thinking that you could totally get a local whiskey place to make whiskey for that whiskey brand and do that as a promo. Just throwing that out there as an idea with your books. Talk about a giveaway. You get that whiskey brand when your whiskey book comes out. We got to get that going. I'm super excited about that. We'll put it on the podcast.
I find the label and everything. I'm going to do that one of these days. That would be kind of cool.
I think that's awesome. Okay, we have to take a quick break. We're going to come right back, but we're going to talk about fans when we come back. So we will be right back with Drinking with Authors.
Sample locally sourced, quality distilled spirits in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. At Skunk Brothers Distillery, we're family owned, brewing small batch grain to bottle spirits, just like our grandfather did back in the Prohibition era. From handcrafted bourbons and moonshine to flavored blends and cordials infused with local fruit. Join us for a tasting tour and buy Skunk Brothers spirits straight from the source.
It's all in the family at Skunk Brothers Spirits, located in Stevenson, Washington.
And we're back. Okay, let's talk about fans for a moment, shall we?
All right.
I love fans. What was your first fan interaction like?
I think my first, I don't know if you would call it an interaction, but it was a random email I got from someone named Karen. I still remember her name. And she just sent me, I saw it and I was like so shocked that anybody even like had messaged me. And she was talking about, she had read my books from before, all of my books that I wrote when I was with Haden Hudson. And then she had, I guess, found me as Aidèe Jaimes and she started reading those. So it was really neat to like just see the cross. It just felt amazing. That was my very first time I ever actually, I guess, had anybody like really tell me that they enjoyed my books, other than, like the reviews or whatever. But
do you pay attention to reviews? What is your review stance? Different authors have different stances on reviews. What is yours?
I like to read them. I'm not overly bothered by a bad review. I feel like I've gotten enough of them to like not, it doesn't bother me. I'm just like, but the good reviews, those are the ones that kind of, they just give me that extra fire to keep on going. Like, especially on a day where I feel down for whatever reason, or I'm not extremely motivated. And I just need that little extra push, and I'll go in there and I'll read the good reviews. I go in and I like filter and do like the 5 stars, and I read those, and it makes me feel good. And I do like to, because sometimes they will put in there things that, even just an example, when I have like a duet and they'll put, oh, I wish that they had done this, or that the author had done that, or whatever. This would have, I hope that she answers this question. And I'm like, oh, and I will incorporate that into the second book. Like I did that with a Cruel Duet, where they had mentioned something about needing something to be answered that I hadn't even considered. And I put it into the second book, and I did it with this one as well, with the one that I'm writing, or that I just finished now. So wow. I love reading them. I feel like they make me better.
Do you have an author group on your Facebook page or anything like that for authors to talk?
I do.
Fans to talk. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, champagne. Ooh, I'm gonna have some more.
I do, and actually, it's called 80s Book Affairs, and last year, the year actually right before the pandemic, I was hosting like monthly takeovers. It was a lot of fun. Like, we just had a lot of like guest authors, and then with the pandemic, it kind of slowed down because I had a kid in the house 100% of the time, so it was very difficult for me to do anything. But hopefully this year we'll pick up a little bit more with that, just like a fun thing for the readers, because I'm not, they read me, but they also read other people, and I read people too, so I kind of enjoy them telling me about authors that I haven't, maybe hadn't heard about. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun. I like having it.
Oh, I think it's great, because I think we're at a time where fans finally get to really interact potentially with authors that they like, and get the opportunity to communicate with them, where that wasn't the case years ago. Even probably goes back 5 years. Not that people weren't doing some of it, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now, where you can actually reach out and ask an author questions and stuff like that. Do you get a lot of questions about parts of the book, and that you don't necessarily, let me rephrase. It's okay. Champagne. We have had authors that get weird questions that want to deep dive into parts of the book, and they're like, no. Do you get a lot of weird questions?
I don't get a lot of weird. I do get private messages, and I'll always read. I actually have a few people that have kind of almost become like friends are pretty important readers to me because they'll give me, we just really can interact really nicely, and they can tell me like, you know, I liked it a lot, or, you know, some, you know, a question about it or whatever. But normally, and I haven't had anybody like straight up ask, and I think a lot of times because of the way that I write, I usually have a big cliffhanger or something that's a big mystery, and that you just they can't really like outright ask sometimes some of the stuff. So they'll do it in private message. And great. You know, to me, I really try to like answer everybody, because I know I have sent authors messages before and I don't get a reply. I'm like, you know, just as a reader, it's kind of like, oh, you know, but so I don't want any, I always try. I know eventually it might get to a point where I can't, but.
No, I think it's important as much as you can, or if you're going to not necessarily reply, have a message that says, I may or may not reply to this email. It does suck. It's kind of like applying for a job when you send out your resume and you hear nothing either direction. It just can suck, you know? Let's talk about your writing process a little bit. So you have quite a few books out. How many books have you published now since you began?
As I think it's been maybe about, between both pen names, maybe about 24, I feel like. With under this, it's 12 under this pen, under Aidèe Jaimes.
Wow. And when did you start Aidèe Jaimes? When did you launch that?
That was 2018.
So
12 books in 2.5 years? Is that?
No, in 3 years.
3 years? Oh, okay.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
How fast do you write a book?
Depends on the book. I think like for the ticket took me a year probably, just because, you know, I have a 7-year-old daughter, so she was little, you know, a lot little, and she was at home, and I was, you know, I just couldn't do it. And then once she started going to preschool, I would drop her off, and then I would stay there in the parking lot, or in like, they had like a little cafe, and I would go and I would write there for 3 hours, which is the length. And then I couldn't do it anymore because I was, you know, and I'm not one of those authors that can write at night, because I know like a lot of people are like, oh, you know, I put it all in at night when everybody's asleep. I can't, I gotta sleep.
Well, Jen happens to be one of those authors that stays up till like 4:30 in the morning writing.
But I also have a very understanding husband who gets up with my daughter in the morning.
Yeah. No, my husband, he cannot wake up. She could be screaming for him in the night. He will not wake up. He's out. So it's got to be me. So I have to make sure I get that sleep, and then I have to get up and, you know, start my day. So
wow.
I get it in when I can. And I mean, I actually thought I was kind of slow.
No, you are not slow at all. No.
So you said you wrote your first stuff longhand. If you're writing in your car, are you using your phone? Like physically, how do you write now?
I prefer writing on my computer, because I feel like I make the least amount of mistakes, and, you know, I don't have to, like, I have it already formatted the way I want it to be and everything. But I'm in a busy house, so it's really tough for me to always do that. So I'll write it in Google Docs a lot in my phone. Mm-hmm. And if I really have like a nagging scene in my head, and I'm like, I have to write this right now, and I just can't because there's too much noise, I'll go into the closet and like real quick, you know, it's like full of mistakes, and, you know, it doesn't even say who says what. Usually it's just like dialogue. And then I write it, and then I'll cut and paste it into Word later and then fix it.
You do voice memos to yourself?
No, I don't do that. I actually tried the other day. I was like, Alexa, do you do dictation? I was asking it, but she couldn't understand what I was saying. So apparently she doesn't do it. But I was trying to figure out how, because I've heard that authors do that. Like they do, like they'll talk into something, and I have no idea what it would be. So.
Well, I will say I don't know if you have an iPhone or Android, but you can open up Google Docs, hit the microphone button, and just start talking.
Oh, I had no idea.
Oh yeah, you can do that. There's also voice memos on the iPhone. I use those all the time when I come up with little ideas or scenes. I'll hit the voice memo because I can talk while I'm driving so that I'm not really violating things. And then, you know, put it. I find it really useful, even or texting yourself with a scene, because then you copy and paste it on Facebook. Like you can do a voice scene to yourself on Facebook and then send it. These are just little ideas. I know there's Dragon Naturally Speaking, which I had at one point in time, but you have to spend a lot of time teaching it to understand. And to me, to me personally, I know a lot of people that use it and love it, but it was so annoying trying to teach it, but I'd still have to go back and correct it. But I was like, nah. But
no, I'm very, I have a hard time with technology. So I need the old stuff. I actually I didn't really even want to use Google Docs because that just is so foreign, but I had to do something. So I finally learned kind of how to use it on my phone. But I prefer.
How do you say that? But then you're making covers yourself.
I know that was, I don't even, that was the fluke.
What are you using to make your covers? Like, are you InDesign or?
I use Photoshop.
That's like a whole career learning how to use Photoshop.
Yeah, it was, I don't even know why I even started or why I even got Photoshop in the first place, but it was something completely not related to this. And I was like, I could maybe try to fix, do this or do that or whatever. I can't even remember how I got into it, but somehow I figured out how to do it. But I have like last year's Photoshop because it accidentally uploaded like the new Photoshop and it changed the way it works. And I like freaked out because I'm just too old for that. So like re-download the new, like the old, and then have it. So that's what I use. I'm on the old and I'm not moving from that.
Does your husband read your books?
No. He does not. He doesn't like that kind of stuff. He's the sort of person who reads like books that are like about how to be like a better, better manager, like for his work or better, he's just always like how to be a better leader, how to be a more successful person. Like those are his types of books where he just really tries to be a better person. I'm the one that like writes about smut.
No, trust me, we have very supportive other halves. They just don't necessarily read our work.
Yeah. I mean, he knows, like, I'll like run something by him, like, and he always gets this glassy, like, he's like, oh my God. But I'll be like, hey, what, especially if it's like a criminal, because he always watches these shows about criminals. So I feel like we're studied in that, I'll ask him like, what kind of gun would so-and-so have, or, stuff like that. What's a lot of cocaine? What's considered a lot? So
he considered a large quantity of cocaine. I'm not asking for myself, but don't write it down. Just tell me.
Can you Google that? Like the writer's Google history. How much is cocaine right now?
Oh no. Yeah, mine would be
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I always tell one of my very good friends, I'm like, if I'm ever arrested, the first thing I need you to explain to them is that I'm a writer and give them my books, because I write horror stories. So sometimes I look up like, how long does it take for a body to decay in this kind of temperature and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is going to come up eventually. I'm going to be sitting in front of police going, so yeah, can I have a lawyer?
You need to have your like something that shows all your books always on you for safety.
It's not a business card. It's a laminated copies of my covers. Like, I promise I'm not a crazy person. So what about writer groups? Did you ever get involved in like a writer group or a writer community? Did you go down that path at all?
Other than Alessandra Torres Inkers, which is actually, I don't even know how I came across that. I think I had already published the first book, and then I was like, oh, like I need to know, like, what else do you do? Like, so I just started typing, I think like, how do you do this? Like, is there somebody to teach you this? And it sent me there. So that was where I really got a lot of my information on how to be an author.
But what about other writers? You said you've connected with some of them and stuff like that. Have you ever been a part of a writers group or anything like that?
No, actually, other than, just kind of forming like friendships, like, that type of group or like promo groups. No, it's just you, just me.
Just you, just you.
Just go by myself.
What about conventions? Have you been to conventions, like writer conventions and stuff like that?
I have not. I actually just even recently started going to signings to like as a reader last year. So I've kind of.
You're that author that's alone in the cabin typing out their work. That's not something we find very often.
Yeah. I only come out times.
Go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
I was gonna add, like, social media. Are you active there? Is that how you interact? Like
in my group? Yeah, I try to kind of like do something every day. Maybe if not every day, every other day or something. Kind of like a hello, I'm still alive.
Do you have a newsletter?
I do have a newsletter, and I do that once a month, or depending on if I have a release or something like that, or if I'm part of a promo or something. And I that's pretty much it. I don't really have any other social. I guess every once in a while I go into Instagram because I forget that it's even there. And then I'll get like a little notification like, hey, so and so's like liked your this or whatever. I'm like, huh?
And then with Facebook buying Instagram, you can put everything through Facebook to Instagram. So that works out really, really well.
Yeah.
What about music? Do you listen to music when you're writing? Like, what is your ideal writing situation? Like, if you could build your fantasy writing situation, what would it be?
Not a closet.
Not a closet. I'll do it. I'll make that my fantasy if I have to. Usually I like to just be in my office. My husband made me a desk so that I could write. So I like to be in my office and I just turn on some music. It's usually something very sad. It has to be something like heart-wrenching. A lot of times is what makes me want to write, like something just, it doesn't even have to be the words, it's just the melody or whatever. And that's, I'll just write to that, whatever the story goes to that.
Do you make playlists for your books?
I don't, and I should. I will send them to my group. So I'll do like a, where, you can send it, the link from Apple, I'll create like those links and I'll put them in my readers group. But I've never actually put it in my book, which I know some people do, but I have never actually done it. I think sometimes it's really honestly only one song that I just listen to over and over. Yeah. So
Can you listen to songs with words in, right? Songs with words. A lot of authors can't listen to songs that have lyrics in them.
Yeah.
Because then they get distracted by the lyrics and can't write.
Yeah, I can write with words. I can definitely do lyrics. I can't come back and do my revisions with it though. Like once I'm done with the writing process, I can't have any music or any noise around me. It has to be quiet. So that's the time that I do that. But when I'm actually actively writing the story, it is a lot of times it is instrumental. Like, so if there will be a song that I really enjoy, I will look for it in instrumental just because it's definitely a little easier if there aren't any words. But if there's not, I'll listen to it doesn't matter. I can write with the word. I just, I listen to what they're even saying, honestly. It's just the melody.
No, it makes sense. I can't. I start singing along with the song and then I get very distracted and then I'm just not productive. I listen to a lot of Celtic instrumental music no matter what I'm writing. For whatever reason, that's my jam is Celtic instrumental music.
Yeah. Like the last book, The Cruel Duet, I actually had Metallica to one of their songs was like, and it's even in the book. So I really listened to that one over and over when I was writing that scene. So that it kind of, and I will name it sometimes in there. Like I'll put the name of the song that goes to the scene. So like, and I was, she'll say something about, such and such I thought about this song or something like that. And I'll put the name of the song and the artist that I was listening to at the time in there. I'll insert it.
That's very cool. What about, do you get a lot of artists, like bookmarks and things like that? Have you done a lot of stuff down that vein?
I've done a little bit of it. I did, obviously I have some bookmarks, and I did for private investigation. That was the only thing where I did anything specific, even for a book, where there are business cards that are used there, and I I'd had them made. I designed them and had them made. And then whenever I give anybody a copy of it, I'll put that in there just because it's something tangible from the story, Other than I just have, regular, steamy couple on there.
You got to get your whiskey on. Then you could do shot glasses.
I'm excited about this whiskey venture. I think this whiskey venture is going to be amazing.
Yeah. That's going to be that book is actually, and I started already writing it, but I always end up kind of stopping and I go to something dark, but that's going to be a very fun book, I think. Well, at least in my mind, it's fun.
No, I think that sounds amazing. Plus it ties in whiskey, which gets me super excited. Let's talk about what is your latest release. So what is your latest book that came out?
The last one that came out was King of Bourbon Street, and that's a dark mafia. And it's a duet. So the second book, which is Queen of Deceit, comes out this month.
Oh, wow.
So that's a duet. And yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. It's with the editor right now.
Very cool. So what's the next one coming up?
The next one, I'm going to start a cartel series, which I'm really excited about, which is probably going to be my darkest, I think, because when I already have a lot of it in my mind, and it starts off very dark. So I'm really excited about that because I'm actually Mexican. So I'm going to be going back a lot to, I wasn't born there, but we would go all the time.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of be going back to that, like drawing from that a lot. So,
and you mentioned that, how many of your characters are Mexican when you write them?
I have a few that are Mexican. I don't really shy away from writing any race, really, like if that's who the character is, that's who the character is. But there have been a few Mexicans. So Christiana, who is in the first, the ticket, she's Mexican. And she mentions a few things that, because I'll put some of the stuff that is from my background in there. And then I did a whole book based in Mexico where my father is from, that we used to go to visit all the time. And another book that I wrote in my past pen name. And that was a lot of fun. But other than that, those are the only ones that I've done that are Mexican until now when I write the new series.
The cartel will be.
The cartel.
Yes, that's super. Do you ever think about bringing those older books forward into your new name and redoing them? Or do you consider that just part of your past?
I consider it part of my past. I think, some of those stories are like, I still listen to, like, I'll hear some of the songs that I listened to when I was writing them, and it'll break my heart, because it's just like so nostalgic. And I just think about, I remember them in my head, like what the characters look like. But I don't know that I want to rewrite it, I feel like it's already done and I want to move on. Like I have 1,000 stories in my head. And so I feel like I need to get those out, but I don't even change the name on it because it's so different. The writing style was very different. It just has, they're paranormal to begin with too. So it's, none of the newer books that I write are paranormal. So if I wrote another paranormal romance, I would probably put it in that, with that group, just so that it kind of is all the same,
Wow.
A cartel paranormal romance.
I don't know if I might stick some ghosts in there. I don't know.
Wow. It's interesting. Paranormal too. That's awesome. Okay. I had a question. Champagne just dulled the question. It's coming. Oh, yes. So, Do you do this? You do this full time. You're a writer full time, correct?
Yeah, well, part-time writer, part-time mom, part-time
Yeah, no, I mean all the life stuff happening. Do you have did you find that during the last, during the pandemic, you talked about your kiddo being at home and stuff like that, but what was that like for you as a writer? I know a lot of writers who, we all talk about being able to stay home and we'll have all this time to write, and a lot of us, that just did not quite work out the way we wanted it to. What about for you? Do you feel like it did not?
No, and actually when the pandemic hit, I was in smack dab in the middle of the crew duet. So I had just finished the first book and was going into the second book. And that was extremely tough because I did have her at home. My husband was still going to work, so because he was an essential worker, so it was kind of like I was pretty much 100% of the time on, so I didn't have, I wrote that one a lot at night. My mom was with me for a while, and she helped for a few days, and that was when I got the majority of the writing done. But I mean, once I finished that, I just went on hiatus. I just couldn't do it. It was too hard to concentrate.
No, so I think that was true. I mean, life was very different all of a sudden during the pandemic, for everybody. So
especially during school, because we had to sit there I had to sit there with her during school time. So that was the hardest part, was that I was pretty much at school. I was back in kindergarten.
Yeah. You're like, I am doing color books now. This is this is my life. Okay. Well, as we wind down, I would like to know what advice you would give authors out there.
I think probably if it's a new author, don't stop writing, because, just write. Don't ever look at what somebody else is doing. And I think this is probably advice that was given to me, is don't compare yourself to anybody else. Just, don't be afraid of writing something just because it doesn't conform to what everybody else is writing. Take the risk. Sometimes it pays off, so just write what you feel. That's what I would suggest.
I think that's brilliant advice. Awesome. Okay. How do people find you? How do people find your books?
Well, like as far as like the website, or
yeah, your website, your social media, your shameless self-promotion. Please don't tell people where you live. I had an author do that early on in the show, and we had to edit it out. They're like, I live in, and I'm like, don't do that. We don't need creeper people. So how do people find your website and everything like that?
So my website is www.aidejaimes.com. And you can find me there, but you will most likely always find me at Aidée's Book Affairs on Facebook. That's the easiest place where you're going to find what I'm doing. I'll put, excerpts, and I'll do, that's the first place where I, post what's coming out. That's where I hang. That's where I talk to people. So that's my place. That's where my safe space.
No, that's very cool. You have been amazing and fun to have on this podcast.
Oh, thank you. And I didn't
so much. I know you're not drinking nearly as much. Don't worry. We have a literary briefs episode. You can catch up to it. It'll be fun. Okay. So this has been Drinking with Authors. I've been your host, Erica Lance.
J.M. Paquette,
who does never say she's the co-host. And with us, it's been Aidée Jaimes, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.